Hi, I'm Maya Ramos, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. For 15 years, I worked behind the scenes at Novatech Solutions, the technology company my brother, Julian, and I inherited from our father. While Julian became the charismatic face of the company, I quietly built our empire from the shadows. But sometimes, the shadows are exactly where you need to be to see people's true colors. I still remember the day everything started, back when our company was nothing more than a small consulting firm operating out of a converted warehouse in Silicon Valley. Dad had built it from scratch, teaching himself to code while working 3 jobs to support our family after we immigrated from Taiwan. Julian was always the golden child, charming, outgoing, and seemingly destined for greatness. I was the quiet one, the one who spent weekends learning to code instead of going to parties. When Dad passed away 5 years ago, he left us both equal shares of the company. "Take care of each other," he said in his final days, his wise eyes moving between us. "Together, you can build something extraordinary." What he didn't know was that I had already been building something extraordinary, a revolutionary ad-driven cybersecurity system that would eventually transform our small firm into a billion-dollar enterprise. The problems began 3 years ago when Julian met Ava at a tech conference. She was everything I wasn't: tall, elegant, with an MBA from Stanford, and a resume that included stints at all the right companies. Within 6 months, they were married. Within a year, she had convinced Julian that she should join the company. "Ava has amazing experience in financial management," Julian had said, his eyes bright with that familiar enthusiasm. "We need someone like her to help us grow." I had nodded, swallowing my objections. What Julian didn't know was that I had already secured a series of funding through my own connections, and our growth strategy was well underway. Ava started as a financial consultant, but her ambitions were clear from day one. She began attending all executive meetings, offering opinions on everything from marketing strategies to product development. She hired her friends from business school for key positions, slowly building her own power base within the company. I watched it all from my quiet corner office, where I continued developing our core technologies and maintaining relationships with our major clients. Ava never bothered to learn what I actually did. To her, I was just Julian's quiet sister, who lacked the polish and pedigree she valued so much. The tension between us grew steadily, but I kept my peace for Julian's sake. That is, until last week's party, the event that would change everything. Ava had just been appointed CFO, a position she campaigned for relentlessly. To celebrate, she organized a lavish party at the Four Seasons, inviting Silicon Valley's elite. The guest list included venture capitalists, tech journalists, and social media influencers, everyone who could spread the word about her rising star. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress that I'd chosen carefully for its understated elegance. I was holding court in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. As I approached to congratulate her, she turned to one of her Stanford friends and said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Why is the cleaning lady here? This is an executive party." The room didn't exactly fall silent. Silicon Valley parties never do. But I felt the ripple of awkward glances and suppressed whispers. Julian, standing nearby, looked uncomfortable but said nothing. That silence hurt more than Ava's words. "Oh, I'm sorry," Ava continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "I forgot you're Julian's sister. It's just that you're always hiding in that back office. I hardly ever see you at important company functions." She gave a tinkling laugh, though. "I suppose someone has to handle the technical details." I stood there, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Years of being underestimated, of being dismissed, of watching Ava slowly try to push me out of my own company. It all crystallized in that moment. But I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled, raised my champagne glass, and said quietly, "Congratulations on your new position, Ava. I'm sure tomorrow will be quite interesting." She barely acknowledged my toast, already turning back to her admirers. Julian caught my eye across the room, but I shook my head slightly and left the party early. I had work to do that night. In my home office, I opened my laptop and began preparing the documents I'd hoped I'd never have to use. The truth was, Ava had never bothered to read the company's ownership structure carefully. 3 years ago, when we needed capital for expansion, Julian had sold me 17% of the shares to avoid diluting our ownership with outside investment. He'd been so focused on impressing Ava that he'd signed the papers without reading the fine print. I now own 67% of Novatech Solutions. I worked through the night, sending emails, making calls to our board members, and preparing the announcements that would go out in the morning. As I watched the sun rise over Silicon Valley, I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolution. Dad had told us to take care of each other, but sometimes taking care of a situation means making difficult choices. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, sat in the conference room, waiting, and watching the city come alive through the floor-to-ceiling windows. At precisely 9 o'clock a.m., Ava strode in, carrying a stack of papers and wearing a triumphant smile. That smile froze when she saw me sitting at the head of the table. "Maya, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trailing off as she noticed the others in the room. Our board members joining via video conference, our legal counsel, and Julian looking pale and shaken. I smiled, thinking of all the times she dismissed me, all the times she treated me like I was nothing more than a technical support staff. "Actually, Ava, we need to discuss some changes in the company's structure." "What changes?" Ava's voice had lost its usual polish. She remained standing, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the back of a conference chair. I opened my laptop and projected a document onto the main screen. "As of this morning, I'm exercising my rights as majority shareholder of Novatech Solutions to implement some organizational restructuring." Ava's laugh was brittle. "That's ridiculous. Julian and I control 67%. I interrupted quietly. "I own 67% of this company." I switched to the next document, showing the ownership breakdown. "Would you like to see the paperwork?" Ava's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, anger, fear. She turned to Julian. "This can't be right. Tell her this isn't right." My brother looked like he aged 10 years overnight. "It's true," he said softly. "I sold Maya part of my shares 3 years ago when we needed capital for the AI development. I never thought what?" Ava's voice rose sharply. "Never thought your little mouse of a sister would actually use her power. Never thought she'd dare to challenge me." I held up my hand. "This isn't a challenge, Ava. It's a correction." I turned to address the board members on the video screens. "As you can see from the documents I sent earlier, there have been several concerning decisions made in recent months. The hiring of unqualified personnel at inflated salaries, the reallocation of R&D funds to marketing, and the attempted sale of our core ad patents to a competitor." Ava's face went white. "How did you know about the patent sale?" I finished for her. "I built our security systems, Ava. Did you really think I wouldn't have protocols in place to monitor attempts to access our intellectual property?" One of the board members cleared their throat. "Miss Ramos, we've reviewed the documentation you provided. The board supports your proposed restructuring." I nodded my thanks and turned back to Ava. "Your position as CFO is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your office." I pressed a button on my phone, and 2 security guards entered the conference room. "You can't do this," Ava's composure finally shattered. Julian looked between us, and for a moment, I saw the boy who used to stand up for me on the playground when we were kids. But we weren't kids anymore, and this wasn't a playground fight. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said quietly. "Maya's right," Julian said as the security guards led Ava away, her threats and accusations echoing down the hallway. I felt no satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. Protecting our father's legacy, our company's future, and yes, even protecting Julian from his own blind spots. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I restructured the executive team, bringing back some of the talented people Ava had pushed out. We refocused on technology development, and our stock price soared when we announced new security patents. Julian and I had several long conversations, often late into the night, in our old conference room. "I forgot who you really are," he admitted one evening. "Somewhere along the way, I started seeing you through Ava's eyes instead of my own." "We both forgot something," I replied. "We forgot that being family means being honest with each other, even when it's hard." 3 months later, I received an envelope from Ava's lawyer, divorce papers from Julian, along with a demand for a substantial settlement. I watched my brother sign them without hesitation. "You know," he said, putting down the pen, "Dad always said you were the smart one." I smiled. Dad said we were both smart in different ways. He was right, we just needed to remember how to work together. A year has passed since that party where Ava called me the cleaning lady. Novatech Solutions has tripled in value. Our security system is becoming the industry standard, and Julian and I have found our balance again. He handles the public relations, which he's so good at, while I continue to drive our technological innovation. Last week, I was invited to give the keynote speech at a major tech conference. As I stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of faces, I thought about all the quiet people out there. The ones working behind the scenes, the ones others might underestimate. Success isn't always about being the loudest person in the room, I told them. Sometimes it's about being the most observant, the most prepared, and yes, sometimes even the quietest. Because in the end, true power isn't about titles or corner offices, it's about knowing your worth and standing your ground when it matters most. Ava, last I heard, is working for a small startup, telling anyone who will listen about how she used to be CFO of Novatech Solutions. Sometimes I see her quoted in articles about women in tech, and I have to smile. She still doesn't understand that leadership isn't about the title you hold. It's about the value you create. As for me, I keep my father's picture on my desk. His kind eyes remind me of his last words. Take care of each other. In the end, that's exactly what I did. I took care of our company, our legacy, and yes, even my brother. Sometimes taking care means making hard choices, but as long as you stay true to your principles, you'll never lose your way. The cleaning lady turned out to be exactly what she was doing all along.